13. The lowering afternoon sun was tinting the front of the temple of the oracle cream and gold by the time the doctor and Themos joined the tail of the queue shuffling into the building. "Now that looks really Egyptian," Perry commented over the comlink. The approach to the temple was flanked by opposing rows of crouching stone lions set on heavy plinths. Its entrance arch was formed by distinctive square section tapering pylons, and set either side were two massive seated figures of Antony and Cleopatra in Egyptian dress. They reminded Perry of the colossi before the great temple at Abu Simbel, which he had once seen while on holiday. "Mere effect," murmured the doctor dismissively. "The resurrection of dated styles, no doubt to remind the Romans of the origin of the oracle." Slowly, they passed through the entrance into an open court, running through a veritable forest of imposing columns. Bored-looking guards watched the column of visitors as they edged forward. They were passed by a steady trickle of those leaving, presumably after having communed with the oracle. Perry looked for signs of mystic enlightenment on their faces, but couldn't see any. There was a shallow metal bowl set on a tripod stand beside the steps leading into the next section of the temple, and it was half filled with coins. "It is not compulsory," whispered Themos, digging out some small change from his pouch and dropping it into the bowl, "but it is expected." "A fine distinction I will not quibble over," replied the doctor dryly, adding a token coin of his own to the collection. "It is far cheaper than the purchase of a ticket to ask the oracle a direct question, though I'm afraid, Doctor, that we shall not be allowed very close to the oracle itself." Themos was right. After traversing a hypostyle hall ranked with yet more columns, those people in the queue with tickets were separated from the rest into their own, smaller file. They all passed between heavily studded and ornamented double doors and entered the sanctuary chamber containing the oracle. The ticket holders were ushered on through gates in a latticework screen and into the centre of the chamber, whilst the rest had to circle the chamber's walls, peering between columns and fretted and scrolled panels. "Can you see anything, Doctor? Because I sure can't," Perry exclaimed with annoyance. Several pans bearing smouldering incense were dotted about the inner chamber, filling the air with a haze of blue smoke. What had to be the oracle itself was further screened by long, gauzy curtains hanging in graceful folds from the ceiling. The doctor watched with intense frustration as a figure in priestly robes approached one of the petitioners, and the man gave his question in muted tones. The priest then passed through the curtains and appeared to rest his hands on what might have been a table and bow his head. There was something mounted on the centre of the table, which glittered like metal or glass, but the details were maddeningly indistinct. After a minute, the priest straightened up and returned through the curtains to the questioner. He spoke to him quietly for some moments, the man's face expressing surprise, then puzzlement. At length, he bowed to the priest and left the chamber. The doctor and Themos continued around the perimeter, but failed to get any clearer view of the oracle. "You must pay for a ticket to get any closer," said Themos, "or else join the classes of the new mechanical artisans, whose work has been so greatly influenced by its revelations." A gong was sounded. "Ah, that is all the public access time allowed for today. Later, the officials and artisans will come and ask their questions in private. Meanwhile, we must leave, I'm afraid." The remaining onlookers were being ushered out of the chamber and back down the hallway, carrying a scowling and frustrated doctor with them. There was a sudden commotion. A large, impatient man in richly cut robes was trying to force his way through the departing crowd towards the oracle chamber. "I must see the oracle now," he kept saying urgently. He pushed a woman aside in his haste, and she slipped and fell, dragging somebody else over with her. A medley of angry voices grew, and fists were waved. The guards closed in to try to restore order. For a moment, all eyes were turned to watch them. Then Themos heard the doctor whisper quickly in his ear, "Hope to see you tomorrow. Don't look round." And he was gone. On the TARDIS monitor, Perry watched columns rushed past the quickly moving camera, then a small, stout door open, revealing a long, dimly lit passage. "Doctor, are you sure this is a good idea?" He did not reply. The passage had several doors leading off it. The doctor moved down the line, pausing to listen at each one until he reached almost the last one, which he opened carefully. The room beyond was small and of uncertain purpose. It had a stone bench on one side, with the carving of a bull's head superimposed over a concentric design on the facing wall. There was a second door, locked by heavy bolts, opposite the one the doctor had entered by. Silently, the doctor crossed over to it and pressed his ear to the woodwork. He realized there was a small sliding panel at eye level. Gently, he eased it back a couple of inches and peered out. After a moment, apparently satisfied with what he saw, he slid it closed again and sat down composedly on the bench. "Well, I hope you know what you're doing," came Perry's aggrieved tones in his earpiece. "I have to get a closer look at this oracle somehow, preferably without priests as intermediaries. This room is one of a row that open onto the oracle chamber. I noticed these doors earlier. They're probably for the use of special petitioners to the oracle. All I have to do is stay here until it's quiet tonight, then take a look at the oracle undisturbed. You hope. Actually, I thought I took advantage of the opportunity chance provided rather well." "And how do you propose to get out again?" "If necessary, I'll simply wait until the public come in again tomorrow and slip out with them." "Doctor, it's never that easy." "But it's worth the risk to find out what this oracle is." At first I thought Themos was talking about some mystic figure in a trance, like the oracle of Apollo at Delphi. But there is clearly some sort of artifact installed here that the priests consult. If this is the source of the information on advanced technology these people are getting, then I must take a closer look at it. And then? That will depend on what I find behind the curtains. Perry sighed heavily. "Have it your own way, Doctor, but please take care. Otherwise I'll have to come and rescue you." "In your present unstable condition, that would be most unwise." "You never know, Doctor," Perry replied enigmatically. For nearly an hour after the public had left, the doctor heard only the sounds of the priests and attendants clearing away after them. There was a distant rush of coinage, which told of the offerings being removed for counting. For a while, there was only the distant intermittent tramp of guards' boots. Then came the sound of a group of people approaching, and the doors to the chamber were opened again, and the group of artisans Themos had told him about entered. He observed them cautiously through the panel. They seemed less in awe of the oracle than the general public had been, and he could see them approaching it directly, without the intervention of a priest, though no doubt these were in attendance, but outside his limited field of view. But he still could not make out any further details about whatever it was behind the curtains. He strained to hear what the artisans, engineers, and proto-scientists were saying, but they seemed to huddle in small groups amongst themselves, discussing their thoughts in excited whispers. The doctor recognized the signs of interdisciplinary rivalry, which left him no better informed than before. The group stayed for nearly 2 hours. Finally, there came the sound of departing feet, the lights in the chamber were extinguished, and the heavy doors closed. The doctor beamed with self-satisfaction in the darkness as he heard the lock turn. A few moments later, he heard the door at the end of the corridor also being locked. Still, he waited another 10 minutes to be sure, then prepared to move. he fished out a pencil torch from his belt pouch and called Perry to alert her. She didn't answer the first time, and it took 3 more calls before her voice sounded in his ear. She sounded breathless and so clearly bursting with excitement over something that the doctor asked curiously and not a little anxiously, "Perry, are you all right?" "Fine, Doctor. Just great, really wonderful, fantastic." She was gushing with elation, her words tumbling over themselves. "Calm down, for goodness sake. Now tell me, what's happened?" "Doctor, I can fly!" Just half an hour before, Perry had stood in front of her mirror and known the change was complete. It wasn't what she saw, she decided. It was more how she felt inside. Her senses were tingling, and she felt more alert, more aware of herself than she could recall. She realized dimly that her mind must have adjusted in keeping with the purely physical changes in her body. It had taken time at first, but now she was more in sync with herself than she had ever been. She felt vigorous, wired in, very capable, and tremendously powerful. It was as though there was a new potential within her that was just waiting to be fulfilled. Most of her body was covered with fine dark feathers now, except for her face, the palms of her hands, and soles of her feet. And this seemed entirely right and proper. Her hair had become a fine crest of feathers, neatly growing back from a sharp peak on her forehead to trail down between her shoulders. Strong talons now tipped her fingers and toes, with those extra spur-like claws extending down from her heels. Her toes also seemed longer and more flexible, though not disproportionately so. "I sure could get a good grip on something now," she thought. She had been wondering if she would grow a tail, and suspecting it might make sitting down a problem. But, as it transpired, the thicker growths down her calves and ankles had developed into small, extendable fan-like wings, which would obviously serve the same function, at least in theory. But her most striking feature was her wings. They were elegantly shaped, like the best angel's wings as improbably portrayed on films, except in a darker tint. She felt the delicious play of unsuspected muscles across her shoulders and back as they smoothly unfolded and extended. Fully spread, they spanned a good 16 feet, she estimated. She reached out and brushed the leading edge of one wing, amazed by the sensation of touching a part of her that had not existed a few hours before. But it all seemed perfectly normal at the same time, and she knew some fold of her brain must have opened up or developed to manage these new additions. Perry stroked the finely graded and ordered feathers, realizing she must read up on all the proper names for them. She did remember that the long feathers that ran to the tips were called primaries, and the shorter, broader ones were the secondaries. And what about grooming? She suddenly wondered. Birds do it all the time, but they use their beaks. Will a hairbrush do instead? She dissolved into a helpless fit of giggles. This was all so weird, practically macabre, and yet it was simply the way things were. And she had won her bet with herself. She was laughing in circumstances she would never have dreamed it possible, and had symbolically readjusted the balance of the past. Varos won, Perry won. At last. Experimentally, she beat her wings and felt the exciting flow of air across their surfaces, a sensation that would have been quite meaningless a short time ago. It was a pity she was too big to actually fly, but aerodynamically she knew it would not work, however pleasingly shaped her wings were. She beat them a little harder, and was surprised at the surge of power they seemed to give. She had definitely felt the lift. Perhaps she might be able to glide a little, but she'd need more room to find out. She went through to the control room and checked that all was still quiet at the doctor's end, then stepped out into the antechamber. and was surprised to find how brightly lit it seemed. She paused thoughtfully. Of course! Her eyes had adjusted to the generally low levels of improvised lighting over the hours. There was only one glow blob in the chamber by the stairs, yet its soft light seemed to flood the whole space. What have I got, she wondered? Owl's eyes? For that matter, all her senses did seem to be sharpened. Maybe it would come in handy. Okay, Varos 1, Peri 2. Hesitantly, with her wings extended, she tried a little jump off the lower steps of the stairway. It went well, and she managed a modest glide of a few yards. She repeated the experiment several times, gaining confidence and a sense of balance. I can probably do better than this, she thought, but I'll need more space. She checked on the doctor again, then ran eagerly up the stairs, feeling strangely exhilarated and light-footed. She reached the clear space under the centre of the dome and looked about her, automatically flexing her wings to stretch them as she did so, choosing her most suitable launching point. Yes, that heavy chest of drawers thing would do. Peri stepped towards it on her toes, her mind focused simply on reaching its top, her wings beating in anticipation. Unconsciously, she reached out towards it. Her wings beat harder. She felt her feet leave the ground. There was a moment of dizziness, mingled with stark disbelief. And then she was flying. She rose up into the air on steadily, almost lazily beating wings, acutely aware of the powerful surges of air they generated, aware of the delicate flutterings of her leg winglets that seemed to be keeping her in balance, aware of the jumble of the treasure chamber below her, now visible from an unexpected angle, and of the arching vault just above her wingtips. But most of all, she was aware that flying was totally impossible. This was probably, she reflected, not a wise thought to have, when manifestly she was doing that very thing, because the ground below was undoubtedly hard, and if she convinced herself it actually was impossible for her to be flying, she might suddenly not be. It would be bad timing to return to reality, especially when the alternative felt so good. On the other hand, she thought, reality might just prove to be out to a very long lunch. She circled the room, drifting over the stacked funereal goods, the air from her wings raising occasional puffs of dust. She looked at the ladder leading up to the hole the doctor had cut in the dome. Through there was the way out into the open sky, and it seemed to call to her. That was somewhere she could really stretch her wings. Yeah, why not? Go to it! Final score, Varos 1, Peri 10. Then she thought of the doctor, and the thought seemed quite literally to bring her down to earth. She landed gently, her wings folding neatly and smoothly together across her back. This she had to tell him about. She ran down the stairs back towards the TARDIS. She heard his voice calling her as she slipped in through the doorway. "Oh, Peri, what have you done?" was the doctor's gentle reproach after he had heard her story. He was silent for several moments. "But, Doctor, I feel wonderful. Really great. I mean, I tried parascending once, but there's no comparison. To actually fly yourself, well, you just can't describe it. You had to be there, you know." "I know. That's the problem. This is not a natural ability for your proper body form." "But why shouldn't I enjoy it while I can?" "Because you might get to like it too much. There may be complications afterward." "But you still think I'll get back to normal when everything's sorted out, don't you?" "Physically, there's every reason to suppose you will. This is not the same as Varos, but that is only half the problem. Oh well, it's too late now. We'll just have to cross that bridge when the time comes." "But I still want to know how I can fly. I know it shouldn't be possible." Well, it's possible you are being aided psychokinetically. You mean levitation and so on? But I've never been able to do anything like that. Normally not. But here it is clearly a different matter. Remember, there is still that trace energy field I detected to be accounted for. You may subconsciously be tapping into that for power. Or perhaps, in your unstable condition, you have unknowingly developed the ability to complement the nature of your alternate form. The effect operates unconsciously as you flap your wings, making it appear they are solely responsible. Still, it would probably not be a good idea to attempt flying without using them. Whatever the method, I wish you hadn't begun this. I've got that message now, thank you, Doctor. But, this does make it seem as though there's something odd about this place. I mean, other than your average parallel timeline, of course. That had already become apparent, which is all the more reason why I must take a closer look at the Oracle. It may hold valuable clues. I think it's quiet enough now. The Doctor turned on his pencil torch and carefully slid back the door bolts. The door opened quietly, revealing a dark and still Oracle chamber. He walked softly round the passage between the wall and the latticework screen until he came to the gateway. It was only latched closed. Evidently, those responsible for the Oracle thought the outer doors and guards sufficient security. It was also unlikely that anyone would dare attempt to steal such a revered and unique item. He opened the gate and padded across the inner sanctuary to the curtains that veiled the Oracle. As he got closer, he could make out a few coloured lights glowing faintly in the darkness behind the curtains. The Doctor drew a fold of material aside and shone his torch onto the Oracle. "I don't believe it!" exclaimed Perry, seeing the image that flashed up on the monitor. The Oracle of Alexandria was an exact replica of the TARDIS's console unit.